Good morning, everyone. Antonio did not serve me well. He told you that I wanted to be introduced as a Twitter star, but actually, yes, it's true. My best work, possibly, is there. And I've been asked to give a speech on light, and I think it was wrong of you to ask me that, and I'll explain why in a second. Actually, most of my work, yes, it's trying to shed light on darkness, but what I usually care about, and I do stuff about and produce stuff about, is international relations topic and crisis. I was thinking about this speech and was thinking, where is light in what I do? And it was hard to find, at least at first. I was thinking about my career, like in 10 years, 15 years. And what I started on was the financial crisis in 2009. And then I went on to the European economic crisis in 2012. Then it was the migrant crisis, and I covered that. I didn't tell you I'm a data guy, so I covered most of the stuff that we do at this think tank here in Milan. And then after the migrant crisis came the pandemic, and I covered it too. I think this also serves you well to tell you about the dearth of experts that can communicate in Italy, because they always ask me, because even though I'm not an expert on the topics involved. The pandemic, and as the pandemic finished, I'm now actually focusing a lot on the energy crisis. So crisis after crisis after crisis, what kind of light can I bring you to this? And then obviously, so this sets the theme of my speech. I thought, okay, how do we go from here to something that I want to give you? And for sure, what I want to show you here today is that there are ways that gets us out from the dark, not just in the ways in which we work with data, in which we present data, in which we do stuff and communicate stuff and find things, but also in ways that can really, take us away a bit from the crisis and find the positive things. But I'm starting, actually, from a very dark speech. So in 1985, there was a person, Jill Jaeger, she's a climate scientist. And she was in Austria, and they were discussing some of the findings in climate science right of those decades. It was the first decades in which we were showing, in which we were seeing that really our emissions, our greenhouse gas emissions, were starting to have an impact on our climate, right? And what she said was, all of a sudden we were seeing a problem that people had thought was going to be 100 years away, coming fast within the next generation. And we know it's here today, it's here with us. Well, think about today. We always focus and are biased on the present. We know that, actually we perceive our present as being so filled with crises that are coming up suddenly and we don't expect it. Obviously, it's a feature of the present. It's totally different from the past that we know, right? But at the same time, it's true that if I think about the crises that occurred over the past 20 years and maybe in the past 10 years, they seem to occur more urgently and more rapidly than ever. We could substitute what Jill Jaeger said there, just take away 100 years, within decades, and come in within a few months to just talk about what happened over there, right? So in Mariupol, just figure Mariupol in Ukraine, in February, 20 February, still a city, thriving port, going about the business, and then a few weeks, total destruction. Of course, this can happen everywhere. It has happened elsewhere. We know that at our think tank. We do focus on this. But this kind of fast destruction in an unexpected place, so fast again, was really something that spurred me into what I want to give you today. So what I focus on are three crises. Two actually very close to us, one quite in the past, and what I learned from it in terms of how do we talk about these through data, and how do we maybe shed light into the darkness, yes. I don't see that. I think you see this as whitish. I was actually choosing a background that was grayish, because of course, what does a data scientist do? even when you're into communicating more than just researching. What do you do usually? You try to put all the different shades of gray within what you want to say, right? You try to do everything at once. You try to say, well, that, but also that. That thing, but also that thing. And it's very hard to communicate complexity without, by still being able to be, felt as being clear to your public. And at the same time, whenever you try to be clear, you feel like you're dumbing things down, everything, right? So again, this is one thing that I just did, and I think it explained in pretty straightforward manner what we do when we try to communicate and shed light into the darkness. This is something that you might have seen these days, the energy crisis. So will we live through the winter? Again, a dark topic. Will we manage to get through the winter in Italy, in Germany, elsewhere, with enough gas? And this obviously comes from a model, a very complex model, trying to figure out stuff or how we will behave during the crisis, how much gas we will consume, and how much will be left there. And what you see here is just the outcome of it, right? So you just take the outcome out, and this is how much it will be left. And clearly you have a lot of scenarios, right? You have a good one, a baseline. The cold winter scenario, it's so eerie, right? You see even a line going down below 0. How can the storage of gas in Italy be below 0? Obviously, that's impossible. That just signals that there is a huge crisis coming up, right? If something happens, which is the gray area. But I think that one element that makes it much clearer is not in the model, but it's just the line, okay? So if you look at the line there, National Strategic Storage, what is that? Obviously, I have to explain to you. But if I tell you the lines of our stored gas, never went down that line, right? We never tapped into national strategic reserves before. Then you could finally see clearly into this graph, which is complex, and just see, almost every line goes down there. So if I have to choose whether this is a light or dark topic, I must say I darken it up. Still, don't get this message. Don't worry. I give you 2 things to be lightened about. But yes, the way in which you communicate through one line, it does illuminate what you did with your models, which were so complex. A second thing is, you are economists, especially in this room, I guess, or you specialize in economy, you're interested in that. You might have heard what happened early in October this year, so 2022. The IMF, the International Monetary Fund, came up with estimates of how much Russia is going to lose economically through the war, right? So how much will it actually get into the economy of Russia? How much will it impact it? And the IMF was estimating it at 3.5% recession, right? So minus 3.5%. And I think, if you read that data point, you might be disappointed, unless you are a pro-Russian guy who is, just rooting for them and for the invasion to go well. You might say, why did we sanction them if this recession seems so shallow? And why did we sanction them if this recession is totally different from what was predicted at first? When I recall back in March, it should have been actually minus 10% this year, at least. And others were forecasting even dire things for the Russian economy. Well, it's not all light, of course, but I encourage you to see not the dark side of it, by just switching the perception. And again, I'm giving you this because I know that you will get it. What did I remove from what I told you that was important? So Russia was predicted now, in October 2022, for 2022, to get a recession of 3.5%, around 3.5. But I'm actually not giving you another piece of information that's really important, which is how much was Russia foreseen to grow a year ago, right? It's not like Italy that we always expect to grow about 0%. So any revision, it's fine. I mean, we just take that in, the difference between the 0 and what's coming next. Not at all. So for 2022, if you look at data, at least the slowdown of the Russian economy, just compare numbers, is 6%. It's not 3%. And if you look at the expectations, of course, of the IMF, they can be wrong. It is the steepest contraction in the whole world this year for a mid-sized economy over that. So yes, Russia is being hit. It is also true, this is an economic war. Other countries are being hit. Italy is being hit, not as much as we expected, I'd say. Germany is being hit much more than they expected. China is being hit, not due to the Russian invasion, possibly. And somebody's gaining, right? Saudi Arabia. But just focus on that. I think that we can at least put this into the lighter news. And this has not been communicated enough. We just look at one data point instead of looking at the whole scenario. Okay, so I focused on data in my speech, and I thought, what kind of crisis can I focus on? We just went into, how do we illuminate? And I used the energy crisis. How do we clarify? And I used this. So I thought about the pre-pandemic times. It was just 2019, and I thought about a very different crisis. Okay, it was the migrant crisis. And you'll see, even in a topic that doesn't have many data points to talk about, there is always evidence to come about. Okay, so here you see this weird stuff. It's a big boat. It's a 30-meter boat. It's a German boat. And I was actually taking my summer break in 2019 when this kind of news started to go into alt-right circles, right? Social media, so on. Yes, I'm on Twitter all the time, so somebody was signaling to me, what's happening? Hey. And the news was, there was a new boat in the central Mediterranean, so just close to Italy's coasts and Libya's coasts, doing rescues of migrants, right? It was a big boat, 30-meter boat, that nobody had seen previously doing this kind of rescues. What are they doing there? And as you might remember, we are in Italy now, so you might remember, in 2019, everyone was, trying to scapegoat in NGO ships doing what they did, rescuing migrants at sea, for, as a pull factor. So as, encouraging migrants to get to the sea in the first place, especially from Libya. Well, that has been disproven. It's interesting. I even thought it was true, right? They would encourage, as they go to next to Libya, the departures from there. It's very tricky, and most data point to the fact that it's not the case, but still, there was this kind of argument going around, and this huge boat. Second thing, which was interesting, it was German. It was German flagged. Third thing, it was invisible. So the alt-right was saying there was almost an invisible boat, and they had evidence. If you look at these kind of tracking ships sites like Vessel Finder or something like that, you could see sometimes in this central Mediterranean, devoid of other ships, just this kind of blip. It's called AIS, these signals that emit the boats to get themselves identified. And you could see the signal coming up and then disappearing. And then it would come up again, stay there for a few hours, and then disappear. And I was really completely lost. And so I knew that there was something there, but I didn't know what was happening. Even more interesting, the identitarians, these alt-right guys, they were saying, well, it's not anymore a German boat by itself. They just changed the name to this kind of weird Charlottea name over there, they see in the upright. Actually, I have this kind of, one of the alt-righters here, calling them sick puppies and something like that. The NGOs had new boats coming about, and they were, there was a conspiracy. It was almost invisible. They managed to see it, but it was invisible. And the German government was conspiring against Italy and everyone. They wanted to bring migrants in Italy. What was happening there? It's hard to fathom. Well, what was happening was that, first of all, we had to track, obviously, these ships for a few days. Nobody knew. And then me and a French journalist managed to understand what was happening. you would always see this kind of boat appearing, large boat, 30 meters boat, appearing and disappearing quite next to another NGO carrying out real rescues in the Mediterranean, much smaller, just aiding those that were at sea, risking to die, maybe taking up 20, 30 at a time, but still a normal boat, let's say 50 meters. And what was happening was that, in the end, that kind of signal was emitted by this guy. It was not a ship, it was a dinghy that was used for rescues, and weirdly, just for once, this NGO had put an AIS signal on the dinghy itself, right? So they were just using this kind of dinghy, this kind of signal was coming up. And given, there was a mistake actually by the NGO made, so they registered it with the same name of this almost boat, Charlotte. This was Charlotte 4. And it was so nice when I noticed this, because I thought, okay, this is wonderful. This is like a stupid thing that an identitarian, an alt-right, has done on the web. But why should people care? And I can tell you what happened next. We thought, me and this journalist guy, that we could do, just a story out of it. And what you discover, it was actually my first time in which I made this kind of big-ish splash on Twitter. You discover that when you actually tell it right and make people laugh, it's much better than when you denounce it and make people cry. So we started out, it was really a fun story, obviously, but we started out by saying, the alt-right is wrong. Just meet Charlotte, the new boat used by German NGOs that stops being invisible only if you are a far-right activist. So that works. That did work. I mean, I was not as followed as today, and this kind of impact could not be expected if I just denounced it. So I guess the third argument is you can always, from this very dark screen, very black screen, you can always lighten up even the darkest of moods. And what I learned very hardly during these days of staying in social media and trying to communicate data is, even in the worst crisis, you can always find something like to say. Maybe not try not to offend people, but you can always do that. And I guess this is the message of my speech today. So if the statistics are boring, see if I bored you today, then I got the wrong numbers. Edward Tufte is a great graphic designer, and he got it right, I'd say. And this dark background can really turn white if we just put some thought into it. So thank you.